Everybody ready to go? This is the Board of Directors regular meeting of the RCEA, Redwood Coast Energy Authority, June 22nd, 2023. This is a hybrid in-person and virtual meeting. And Lori, would you read out our instructions, please?
I will. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lori Taketa. I'm the board clerk for RCEA. Before Chair Sherry Wu calls this in-person and online hybrid meeting to order, here's some housekeeping announcements. For those of you here at Jefferson Community Center, the microphones will be on throughout the meeting and are very sensitive. Please do not mute them and do not speak while someone else has the floor. When that happens, online and phone participants will not be able to hear what you're saying. When speaking, please identify yourself for the benefit of remote participants. Online, anyone who's participating online, and I don't believe we have any directors who are participating online or staff, but they would unmute their microphones when they're and their cameras, turn on their cameras. For community members who are participating in public comment periods, please come up to the podium so the microphone picks up your voice. Online public participants, please click the raise hand button in the webinar controls. If you're participating by phone, press *9 to raise your hand. The chair or staff will prompt you when it's your turn to speak, and public comment may be limited to 3 minutes at the chair's discretion. Emailed public comments are accepted before and during the meeting at publiccomment@redwoodenergy.org. Online participants, if you experience phone or internet disruptions during this meeting, please notify us if you possibly can by calling or texting 707-382-7110 or by emailing publiccomment@redwoodenergy.org. Thanks, Ken. And that's all for our participation announcements, Chair Wu.
All right, thank you, Lori. So our first thing on the agenda is item number 1, roll call remote director participation. And like you just said, we don't have any, but we're going to take this time to talk about some meeting reminders. And also I want to appreciate that you guys helped me in the last meeting. We're going to talk a little bit about Rosenberg. So Nancy, do you want to, Nancy Diamond?
Yeah, sure. Do a roll call. I can't remember as a matter of protocol, even though everybody's here. And
Okay, great.
Roll call. So Director Arroyo.
Here.
Director Contreras-Deloche.
Here.
Director Jorgensen.
Here.
Director Mobley.
Here.
Director Provolt.
Here.
Director Ramos. Director Scafani.
Here.
Vice Chair Schaefer.
Here.
Director Tuttle is absent today. Director Wilson.
Here.
Chair Wu.
Here.
There's a quorum.
Thank you. Okay, Nancy.
sure, thank you. So as a reminder, the chair and some of the RCEA staff has asked me to talk about remote participation. You probably have learned how to do this through your primary agencies. And so my apologies if it's a little redundant, but just really briefly to give you the highlights. And maybe some of the tribal members don't have to worry about this because you don't necessarily have to always follow the Brown Act. So there are 3 situations in which you can participate remotely. One is the old classic that's always been available. And that is if you provide advance notice to RCEA staff that you are going to be attending remotely. The remote location needs to be publicly accessible and basically a meeting room, and you post the agenda there and members of the public are able to come to that meeting and participate in the meeting from that remote location together with you. That is something that's always available to you, and especially in a county this large, geographically challenging, may be a good idea to consider. The hitch is that you need to notify our CEA staff, the board clerk, Lori Takeda, 1 week before the meeting because it has to be put on the agenda. And if you find out later on that you can actually be in person here in Eureka, you still need to go ahead with that meeting because it was noticed. You could be here in person, but that remote location still needs to go ahead as a satellite location. Okay, that's always been available and always can be available. The other two are the new sort of pandemic created remote participation exceptions. And one is for just cause, and you can only do that 2 times a calendar year. And if you hit both of those, you're done. You just cannot participate that way. You just, if you can't make the meeting, you can't make the meeting, and you should contact your alternate. Just cause is available if you have childcare or caregiving needs that prevent you from attending in person. And it would be for an immediate family member, or if you have a contagious illness, or if you need to be traveling because of our CEA business or business from another state or local agency. You would use both audio and video technology. So you have to be both visually present as well as, audio presence. And you need to disclose whether anybody more than 8 is in the room with you. Now, your location does not have to be ADA accessible, but you need to disclose whether anybody is there. The third is the emergency. Emergency requires approval by the board, and there is a standing item on the board agenda right under roll call for the board to take up this approval process. If somebody can't attend because physical or medical emergency prevents the board member from attending, they can attend remotely at the very last minute, provided the whole board waits in. You're just supposed to give a very brief description. You're not supposed to disclose any personal or medical reasons for it, but just a brief description. The trick with that one, the emergency, is that you can only do it provided you're not missing 3 meetings in a row or 20% of the total meetings of the calendar year. For our CEA, that's 2 meetings. So for both just cause and emergency, you get 2 meetings out of the calendar year, and then you're out. There's a wonderful staff report that is a standing staff report in every single agenda that summarizes just cause and emergency. So if you want to attend for those reasons, great summary in the board packet. And then also just remember the traditional, oh yeah, let's get it noticed on the agenda and create a location, whether it's maybe where your normal council or board meets, something like that. It's great for remote participation anyway. The other thing I've been asked to remind all of you is separate from remote participation, no texting during a meeting. And it's because the Brown Act requires that you are meeting here as more than a quorum with notice and public participation. And the public has the ability to then watch as your decisions are being made. The moment you start texting, it's creating a little doubt on the transparency of meetings. You might be texting because it's a personal matter, like, sorry, I'm a little late, I can't pick you up, or I'll be a little late, something like that. Totally understood. If you need to do that, you need to do it, but be aware that it's also subject to a Public Records Act request. And that even on your personal device, your personal phone numbers, those are subject to disclosure. So if we get a Public Records Act request, text messages from all of the board members during that meeting, the board clerk will have to contact each of you and ask you for copies of those text messages. So hope I didn't belabor or confuse anybody with that.
Thank you, Nancy. Any questions for Nancy? All right. And then the other thing I wanted to add was that, our board is getting bigger, which is great. And we also want to keep the meetings moving. And last meeting, I felt like I didn't have complete control, and I'm such a control freak. I want to have complete control. And one, I can't remember, somebody said, hey, are we following Rosenberg's rules? And I was like, I don't know, are we? So I did my homework, figured out, the 10 steps of Rosenberg's rules. And I think we want to try that. And just like to refresh everybody, I'll read them off real fast. Number one, I'm supposed to say what the agenda item number is. Then 2, we have the staff report. 3, and this is where it may differ from what we've been doing in the past. 3 is then the time for the board to ask technical questions of staff. 4 is then we go out to public comments. 5, we come back. And then I ask, is there a motion? Does anyone want to make a motion? Then does anybody want to second it? Does everybody understand the motion? And then we can discuss. After that, we call for the vote. And then I'm supposed to kind of publicly declare what the results of the vote are, or I can say, hey, Lori, what are the results of the, so that's kind of where I want to start rolling this, if that's okay with everybody. Okay. All right. So moving on, we have item number 2, reports from, oh, wait, do I have to go up to public comment on item number 1.1?
Action was.
Okay. Item number 2, reports from member entities. So at this point, is there any announcements or reports from those up for the board? I have 2, actually. One is that Humboldt Bay Municipal Water District, our office is now 100% solar, so yay. And the other thing is that I don't know if you guys know this or not, but we have the hydro plant up at Ruth. It's small. It's like, 2 megawatts, but we have been unable to get power out to the grid for over a month because of there's a substation failure at Low Gap, and PG&E says, well, we don't really know when it's going to be fixed. So we're just like, it's like the highest hydro year we've had in a long time. We could have been making some money on the hydro plant and getting renewable energy out of it, but no. So, yeah, letter to our congressman is following. Anything else on reports from member entities? All right. Moving on to oral communications. This is a time provided for people to address the board or submit written communications on matters that are not on the agenda. And at the end of this, we can respond to statements, but we can't take action on it until it becomes an action item on a later meeting. So any oral communications for the board from anybody?
I believe there was one.
Yeah, we have, if nobody's there in person, I was giving you a moment there, but we do have one public comment submitted by Jesse Noel, and that was regarding project impact cost and mitigation and supporting rooftop solar. And that is available for everybody to view on our website, on our board of directors page.
Thank you, Nancy.
You're welcome.
Anything else? There's nobody out in the public online, right?
Nobody's raised their hand.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, very good. Then I'm going to close oral communications. Next up is consent calendar. All matters on the consent calendar are considered to be routine by the board and are enacted in one motion generally. But if there's anything that directors or the public want to pull, then we will do that. We have item 4.1, approve minutes of May 25 board meeting. 4.2, approve the disbursements report. 4.3, accept the financial reports. And 4.4, authorize the executive director to contact any or all banking services that RCA currently uses or will use in the future and request they stop funding fossil fuel expansion and support transitioning to clean, efficient, and renewable energy sources. So those are the 4 things on consent. Is there anything that people up here on the board want to pull and talk about it? I don't see any. Going out to the public, consent calendar 4.1 to 4.4.
We do have one submitted item for item 4.4 that you may need to pull. The comment was from J.A. Savage, supporting RCA banking at a more responsible institution and moving funds out of First Republic.
And everyone's got a hard copy of that comment.
Okay,
Yeah,
good. And
that's
it's
our-
on the website too.
Yeah, and it's also at the dais here.
Cool, thank you.
All right. So with that, we did that. I guess now, I need a motion to accept everything on the calendar.
So moved. Second.
Do we do a roll call vote still here?
We don't have any remote directors, so
Okay, so we could just go all in favor, say aye. Aye. Is that what you want, or do you want hands raised?
no, just so that I know nobody opposed.
Oh, is there any opposed? Okay, and nobody abstained. All right. Thank you. So got that. Next, we're moving on to CCE business. Oh, wait, wait a minute, it says none, but we have old business. Okay, yeah?
Just regular old business.
So moving on to old business, and we have a quorum, right? Okay, 6.1 climate action plan update.
So as you all may recall, that we've been supporting the county and the cities with development of a countywide multi-jurisdiction climate action plan. And we've been sort of providing technical support. And then obviously a lot of our CEA activities feed into the implementation end of things down the road. And we've got Michael Richardson from the county, who's been leading the effort, who unfortunately or fortunately for him won't be leading it much longer, since he is counting down the minutes before he's retired. But so this may be his last presentation on this, but we're glad to have him just provide an update on the status of the county and the city's efforts. So.
All right, thank you, Mike, Matthew, and our CEA board. Thanks for the invitation to give you a status update. I'll do a quick overview of CAP, a couple of slides here to remind you. The CAP is regional CAP. All of the jurisdictions are participating. And the goal here is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions throughout Humboldt County, the focus of the CAP. There are other CAPs that go bigger. They tackle other climate change adaptation measures, but ours is really focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Here's the process that we're using to develop and implement the CAP. First, we developed a couple of inventories. One that's used in the CAP is the 1990 inventory, and that's consistent with state law. And then we have a 2015 inventory that our CEA did, and that provides kind of the baseline conditions for measuring what our emissions are right now and targeting, provides guidance for targeting what our future emissions should be. And we did a bit of reaching out and communicating with cities and the public in formulating the goals in the CAP. And then we set them, and that's kind of where we're at right now. We've had all of the jurisdictions agree that, yeah, this draft CAP is where we want to go with the CAP. And so it's time now to present or prepare an environmental impact report so we can move that forward into the adoption phase. And so that would conclude that step 3 is adoption of the CAP by all of the jurisdictions. And then we start implementing the CAP, and step there is start getting funding to implement these things and start moving our feet underneath us, take action and tracking and reporting. And then we cycle back again to do another inventory and then make adjustments as needed. So it's kind of a circular process that we've set up. The state targets, which are reflected in our CAP, The 1990 levels, we're supposed to hit those in 2020. And I think we did. A big goal in the cap is by 2030, we're going to reduce our emissions to below 1990 levels, 40% below 1990 levels. And that's in line with the state's goals. And if we get there, then there's this added that we get, which is in terms of our environmental review of other projects, we get to claim that a project is consistent with state environmental goals if it's consistent with the cap. And so it's kind of a simple pathway for new development to achieve the goals of meeting the state requirements. Another goal that's reflected in the cap is the 2045 goal, which is really deep. This is a net neutrality. And so the emissions of carbon are offset 100% by reductions. So those are the targets. Our immediate goal that's really highlighted in the cap is that 2030 goal, but 40% below 1990 emission levels. So high level timeline of the preparation and adoption of the cap. Started in 2018. We did the inventories. We created these measures, and those are reflected in the cap. We completed that public review draft in April of last year and got all of the jurisdictions to sign off on it and began preparing the EIR, and then our anticipated for certification of the EIR and adoption of the cap by all the jurisdictions is in April of 2020. So we are right now in the midst of preparing the EIR. We've selected consultants for this work. The team that we've got, the company, the consulting firm is Rincon. They're out of Santa Barbara, and they are some of the best. They proposal in because we are taking this innovative approach of involving all of the jurisdictions in our cap. And so they haven't done one of those before. They thought it would be kind of new and exciting for their staff. And so they submitted a proposal and it was super competitive and we went with it. And we got funding for this EIR from the Humboldt County Association of Governments. They have some funding that's related to housing, but it has a little carve out for regional climate action plans. And so we're getting the best consultants, and 100% of the consultants' costs are being paid for, all because we're taking this innovative regional approach. We really tip my hat to all of the jurisdictions for being really forward-minded on this. And so we got the consultants under contract in February of this year and had our kickoff meeting, and we did some information exchange, got them kind of grounded in what the cap is and what the targets are. We're working with them on the preparation of on preparing the notice of preparation. That is really the kickoff for public review of climate action plan. The notice of preparation is a a step that's embedded in the EIR process where you send out a notice to everybody that you are preparing this EIR, and you ask all of the agencies and the public, what should the EIR cover? And of course, we've got a list of items the EIR needs to cover, and those have been kind of set by courts and by the legislature. But the public gets a chance to weigh in on that as well. And so we'll prepare this notice of preparation and send it out in July. And then the consultants will begin preparing. They've already begun, but they'll start writing the EIR and sending us administrative drafts beginning in late July, and that'll go through December of this year. And then we'll circulate that draft EIR widely. The public comments on that in early next year, and then based on those comments, we'll make any tweaks to the draft EIR that are necessary and publish a final EIR. And that'll be taken to the Planning Commission for Humboldt County and the Board of Supervisors. The Board of Supervisors will be certifying the EIR that it meets all of the requirements of CEQA, and then their jurisdictions will have document that they can certify for their own individual portion of the cap. So we anticipate the Planning Commission will be in reviewing that EIR and going through the public process of adopting the climate action plan or making recommendations to the Board of Supervisors on adoption of the plan. And then the Board of Supervisors will be taking it up as soon as possible at that point. And that's the update. Yeah.
And just to insert one comment on this timeline. So the RCEA Community Advisory Committee established an ad hoc subcommittee to basically provide support and assistance where possible on the public engagement part of this process. So, following the notice of preparation, they're sort of standing by until then. And then, are going to do what we can to support the county and the cities with kind of engaging the community on the public input part of it.
Well, I'm glad to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Michael. Any questions from the board?
Just one. Where are we at on the production level? Greenhouse, we had a deadline of 40% by
2030.
yeah. So where are we currently?
That's a great question. Matthew, are we planning on preparing an inventory, an updated inventory at some point?
Yeah. So I think, one of the next steps will be to do an update. One of the questions that's come up is it depends on what you include in the baseline. And so there's been a pretty dramatic reduction in countywide emissions from the reduction in industrial activities. So, pulp mills closing, some of the big, emission sources having gone away from between the baseline and now just sort of has caused part of that. Now there's starting to be more economic activity that's, maybe changing that trajectory. But that was one of the things that came up early on in the process of like, well, if you just include all of those industrial sources, we kind of had this attrition in industry, which obviously isn't the goal, isn't to have a reduction in economic activity to hit your goals. But I don't know if you have anything to add to that as far as.
Yeah, right. I think that's a great point. If you were to take the approach of including those industrial, they call them industrial point source emissions because they are related to a particular site on the ground. And if you include the the benefits that have accrued to the county as a result of the closure of these huge industrial users, then we're probably really close to meeting our 1990 levels, or below 40% below 1990 levels.
So the pulp mills would be included in that reduction?
Yeah, what I'm saying is if we were to include, and this is an open question, and this is something that is being debated in the community as we speak. We've got people lined up on both sides of it. And so we need to figure out how we want to approach that. Bottom line is, if you do include them, and right now the CAP takes an approach that we're not including them. But if you were to include them, that gets us really close to our 2030 goal, because those reductions have already occurred. We don't need to do a whole lot in order to get to the goal of 40% below 1990 levels. That really, that is, as I said, being debated in the community, whether or not our CAP should take that approach.
Who ultimately makes that decision?
It'll be the jurisdictions in the end will have a hand in making the decision. The big users of electricity, or the big emitters of greenhouse gas emissions, I should say, occurred in the unincorporated areas on the Samoa Peninsula. And so ultimately, it's the county's portion of the CAP that is most affected by it. And so the Board of Supervisors will be the big dog in the room when it comes to making that decision.
Thank you.
Just to restate that kind of, it's like if we went with the sort of 1990 with all of the pulp mills and mills included, it's sort of like we'd be already almost to the goal. Now that's sort of not a very aggressive way to address climate change. So, the current draft says, well, let's not, take credit for those, economic losses. But to what Michael was just saying, even if we did do that, if you actually look at the footprint of individual jurisdictions, most of the mills that closed were in an unincorporated Humboldt County. The pulp mills were in unincorporated Humboldt County. So, there's obviously some stuff that was within city limits, but it's, the big shift would just be kind of letting the county off the hook. So, and that's at least not what the current draft, kind of includes.
Yeah, and one of the points that's being debated on the side of we definitely should not include them, as is presently the case with the CAP, is if you look at that 2045 goal of net zero emissions, that is going to require a huge lift. It's a big lift for us to meet the 2030 goals. It's going to be an enormous lift for us to meet the 2045 goal. And so if we kind of pat ourselves on the back and say, hey, we were already there by including these industrial point source emissions, then that's going to delay what we need to do in order to hit those 2045 goals. And so it's kind of setting ourselves up for success in a better way. That's one of the points that's being made.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
First, let me congratulate the county for taking such a bold step and trying to reach those 1990 levels. My question would be, as part of your CAP process, do they identify some of the low hanging fruit that might be able to get you there to the 2030 goals? Because part of my read on what you're saying is that by the time this process is over in 2024, you have 6 years to try to get there. And if if it turns out that you don't count that stuff before in some way, 6 years that's a lot of project work in 6 years to kind of get there. If you come out of the gate in 2024. So I was just kind of wondering is it the electrification of the entire fleet? Does that come up, or have you already identified some of those things?
Yeah, and this is the jurisdictions are already taking measures to implement the cap in a not a random way, but in a way that's not tied directly to the implementation measures of the cap. And the public is also implementing the cap. For instance, there's been a much more aggressive adoption of electric vehicles in the county over the past couple of years in relation to what was done in the years past. And so it's happening. People are implementing the cap. And if we were to continue on the trend just in terms of electric vehicle adoption, if we were to continue on the trend, we will definitely get most of the way there. We need to be a little bit better. We need to go a little bit deeper in order to actually achieve the goal that is in the cap. And that's where the adoption of the cap and all of the kind of cheerleading that happens as a result of having a plan and being able to rally support around that plan. That could very well happen in that 6-year period.
Anybody else? Oh, go ahead, Nellie.
I have a couple. So I was also going to ask about the point sources, but from the perspective of, you can't be the only community facing that question of whether or not to include them. Has there been any guidance from the state around that issue and how other jurisdictions have tackled that?
The state sees targets and they don't really weigh in on that decision. They leave it up to the jurisdictions, and there are jurisdictions that go both ways. And so in the end, this is a decision that we are left to make on our own.
Okay. Then if you don't mind, my other question was about, and I always found this really helpful, the implementation table, but it's still needs a lot of detail that goes with the cap. Would we be considering and adopting those implementation measures along with the cap, or is it just the plan itself? And is that sort of like a separate tool to help with carrying it out?
Yeah, no, the cap is going to include specific commitments, and those are the implementation measures. And we're being asked by our consultant to go a little bit, be more specific in the implementation measures. Right now, we have a list of things that we intend to do in order to achieve the goals associated with the implementation measures. And they want us to put dates certain to some of those things. Like, for instance, one of the implementation measures is to adopt REACH codes, which are these building codes that go beyond the state minimums in order to achieve deeper reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. And right now, that's what the cap says, is the jurisdictions all agree to adopt REACH codes. And it just leaves it there. And our consultant is saying, yeah, if you want to justify the reductions that you're claiming associated with that implementation measure, you need to identify what the date of adoption is going to be, so that we can tell the public and they can review the information, the assumptions that are going into the reductions associated with that implementation measure.
Yeah, thank you. It's, I find it, well, I'll save my comments.
Anybody else have technical questions for Michael or staff? Seeing none up here, I'll take it out to the public.
I see no public comment
All
at this
right.
point.
Okay, well, there's no vote or anything, but any other comments? Go ahead, Natalie. That's all right.
There we go.
I really followed the process that you asked me to follow though. Trying to really listen. Yeah, I would just say, I find the the document is great. But I find the implementation matrix to be the part that's really where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. And I think obviously the work you and your team have put in has really been phenomenal and it's been a huge lift. And I also think all of us, I would just encourage all of us to really study this because it talks about jurisdictions and specific measures. And then some places there's numeric targets and to really be prepared to provide feedback. And I don't know exactly how that feedback will come into the EIR process, whether that'll be public comment or whether there'll be a different route by which jurisdictions actually say, okay, well, we can, kind of commit to these things. But I think that's the part there's like 150 or more implementation measures listed, and those are probably going to be expanded, it sounds like, based on the consultant's work. So could you maybe, I realize this is now a question. My invitation to all of you is if you haven't studied it in detail, which many of you probably have, so I'd encourage you to do that. But is there going to be, how would you anticipate that all of the jurisdictions will engage in that process?
I think there's going to be a couple of different opportunities. One is we are working directly with city staff in review of the comments that are being made by the consultants. And we are making sure that whatever specificity we add to the implementation measures, that these are something that they think their elected officials are going to be able to support. And so that's happening right now. We just had a meeting with them earlier today, as a matter of fact, to review some of this stuff. And then the drafting of the EIR, while it's focused on the environmental impacts associated with the climate action plan, all of the implementation measures are up for discussion. We don't need to silo our discussion to just the environmental impacts. We can also be discussing the efficacy of the implementation measures in being able to hit the goals. And so I'm hopeful that we've got a period where the EIR is going to be drafted. There's a 6-month period there. And that is a open target for jurisdictions to be able to refine and to get the public behind the implementation measures. And we have to be careful that we don't modify things so much that the document that is being reviewed in the EIR is changing, underfoot. We need to have a stable document in order to complete that environmental review. But a lot of these implementation measures are, they could use some refinement and some specificity. And so I'm hopeful that the jurisdictions will use the time that the consultants doing their thing to kind of on a free-form basis get their heads around the cap, understand it, and provide more specificity to these things. And there's also an opportunity, I think, to if there are things that are not spoken to in the cap, we can add those things into it. Again, this is all predicated on the notion that the project is stable. So we can't go too far out of the box in our thinking. But for instance, one of the things that is missing out of the cap, there's a discussion of it, but in terms of the actual quantity of emission reductions achieved, there's no contribution from the working lands, the timberlands, the agricultural lands, the salt marshes, all of that is just kind of this black box out there. We know it is sequestering carbon. There's no question. In order to have that sequestration be useful in terms of meeting our climate action plan goals, we need to be able to quantify it. And so we really need to kind of inventory what the carbon stocks are in these various resource categories. And then at that point, we can be developing policies and programs to capitalize on that sequestration that's already happening. And so, for instance, the dairy producers right now they have a program of capturing their the manure from their animals and using it to fertilize their pastures. And if we were able to develop measures that made that process more effective so that they were able to reduce the amount of inorganic fertilizer that they applied, and we were able to quantify that on a per acre basis, that's as good as gold in terms of reducing our emissions. We could easily add that into our cap and not tip the boat in terms of our project description that's being reviewed in the EIR, because it's just substituting one form of nutrients with another form of nutrients, no environmental impact associated with that. And so that would be a level of specificity, refinement, and a new measure that we could add into the cap. And so I'm hopeful that we'll take the time between now and when the CIR is produced to engage with the stakeholders, and all of the jurisdictions can participate in that.
Thank you, Michael. Anybody else from the board? Okay, no action on this, so thank you.
Okay, my pleasure.
Yep.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Michael.
Next up is item 6.2, the rural REN update.
Excuse me, Chair, did we take public comment for?
Yes.
What we did.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And this one over to
Still up here? Yep.
Stephen Cole. Take it away.
And to follow up on that last item, and say, like, to add that there is a fantastic resource for all your jurisdictions when looking for climate action or renewable energy or energy efficiency programs to reduce energy usage and climate impact and greenhouse gas emissions. And fortunately, you all sit on the board of that resource and that organization. I think I'm Stephen Coleman, the Director of Demand Side Management. I'm pretty sure our department has worked with every jurisdiction here and is actively working with many on projects and pursuing projects with other jurisdictions. And so please always take advantage of that's why this JPA was founded. I like to remind, like, not as a CCA, that came later, but there's a lot of things that we can do together to help meet these climate action plans. One of them being segue. A regional energy network. And so the services that RCA has offered to the community have varied in their funding sources over the years. And as you all know, we're reaching our 20th anniversary, or we're in our 20th anniversary. And, we've done programs direct through CPUC funding, partnerships with the utilities like PG&E, things that have been self-funded, grant funded, and always looking to scramble to couple together different funding sources to bring benefits to the communities. And so I'm going to talk about the most recent one and something that we're very excited, which is called the Regional Energy Network. And this one is the Rural Regional Energy Network. And so who is the Rural REN? And so this started back in a group that was formed called the Rural Hard to Reach Working Group. And it was a partner of 6 agencies in rural areas through California, trying to find the commonalities and address the needs of these rural energies or rural regions. And so what was came out of that is the idea of forming what's called a regional energy network with addressing the unique issues and needs of geographically hard to reach California residents. And so this is a long timeline. I won't go through everything, but you can see that this was going back to 2014 when the RHTR group was brought together from the CPUC. Back in 2018 and 19, that group, the Rural Hard to Reach Working Group, voted to explore forming a REN. And in that vote, decided to vote RCEA as program administrator. So another, and I can congratulate all of us because this was before I worked here. So, but showing just like the leadership RCEA has throughout the state on many things. And then things started really snowballing. So, the RHTR voted on doing the business plan and forming a governance model. There was an initial MOU, which came before the board here. And then back in February of 2022, submitted a motion and a business plan to the CPUC, looking for formation of this regional energy network to begin in January of 2023. It's June of 2023, and we're not implementing yet. You can see that that didn't quite work out, but the CPUC decided to align it with the business plans of all of the other program administrators, including the investor-owned utilities, other RENs throughout the states, and other CCAs. And so rolling it into those proceedings for implementation in January of 2024. And in May, just last month, the CPUC came out with a proposed decision approving the entirety of the business plan and budget. And so just a few statistics about what this rural REN will cover. It's geographically huge. So nearly half of the state of California be covered by this entity. 18% of the California population, can do some quick math and see the rurality there, almost half the state and less than 20% of the population. 66 recognized California Native American tribes within that region. Over 90% of those counties have been designated as low income, and over 50 as disadvantaged. And 20% of all of the disadvantaged census tracts in California, in the state of California, are within rural REN territory. So this is very much an equity endeavor, not just a geographic endeavor. And so that map is showing the reach of this network. You can see up there in the North Coast, something very interesting that might catch your eye is that that's bigger than just Humboldt County. The North Coast region is going to include Lake and Mendocino counties through a partnership with the Mendocino Council of Governments and the Lake Area Planning Commission. They're not yet full members of the Rural REN, but are working towards becoming that. So they're going to work underneath RCEA to implement programs in those regions. And you can see some of the other partners. And another interesting thing about this is it's a partnership between nonprofits and government agencies throughout the state. And it's a group, we're legally, I'm obligated to include this slide in every presentation about the rural Ren. And so I didn't tee it up quite as well as Matthew always does though. But this is a group of diverse elements coming together to form something stronger, such as Voltron.
If you didn't grow up in the 80s, you might not have any idea what that is. I said this slide and about half of the CPUC people like think it's hilarious. And then the other half are like, I have no idea.
I liked it. Oh, nice.
So some other things that I think are going to be interesting, I hope to the board here. This is the governance model that was included in our plan. And so these are some things that are going to be very interesting when we're bringing the MOU and other things forward to you. And so there's a laser on this, isn't there? Yeah, so up top here, there's a Rural Ren leadership team, which includes one voting member from each of the agencies. There's the 6 agencies that were listed, plus the 7th non-implementing agency. Nancy Diamond has spent quite a long time with this and going over the intricacies of this. That non-implementing agency is the County of Ventura. But it's going to be 1 vote per member. It's not weighted or geographically dispersed. Underneath that is the program administrator, who's responsible for reporting everything to the CPUC for handling and dispersing the funds, which we'll get to a slide showing the what these funds are. Then the 6 Rural Ren implementing agencies and the various program working groups. So also be an equity advisory committee and various regional advisory committees. And so that shows you where our CEA is participating pretty much on all levels of this. In the Rural Ren leadership team, as the program administrator and one of the implementing agencies, which is some of the interesting things coming out in our governance model, trying to, our administration function needs to treat all of the implementing agencies equally, including ourselves. And so there'll be a bit of a separation within staff of that. Some of the purposes of the Ren, obviously to promote equity in and environmental justice and making sure that rural customers receive the same benefits. And I probably should have stepped back. So this is all funded through CPUC ratepayer funds that are collected on everybody's energy bills, called the Public Goods Service Charge. And traditionally, statistics show that rural communities pay more into these funds, into the public goods funds to the CPUC than they receive out of it. And that's because programs generally get implemented more in metropolitan areas. One of the reasons for that is because there's very strong cost effectiveness measures placed on programs. And it's, we're called hard to reach for a reason. I think all of you who live here know how hard to reach we can be, just how difficult it is. We're 6 hours from anywhere, basically. And to get between our customers takes a long time. So it's if somebody wants to do a heat pump program or something, it's much easier to do it in a metropolitan area where all your customers are bigger and closer together than here where your customers are spread out and also don't necessarily have the capacity. Each agency doesn't have an environmental team to be doing all the work to get this funding. And so we're really trying to change the narrative on that and make sure a lot of these programs come to rural areas. And then have programs designed locally for local people, people who understand the needs of rural California. I think, as all of you also know, rural California is a lot different than metropolitan California. And I'm sure you can all list off multiple ways, but and so different things resonate with the community and ways to try and build adoption of some of these measures to reduce energy uses and reduce greenhouse gases. And collaboration, so working together, building the partnership of all these rural agencies together to come up with good programs and good solutions. Here's a vision that was come up with a while ago that will act as a catalyst to accelerate the implementation of the state's energy efficiency and climate goals in geographically hard to reach California. So really, this is like building on the last presentation. This is the implementation program, or one of the implementation programs right here. Looking to achieve structural and distributional equity, reduced consumption, and also climate adaptive careers. As we're building all these things, we want local workers to be installing everything, not workers from out of the area, and to build up those careers and everything locally. And so I'm going to run through the programs quickly that are being proposed through this, that are pending approval. So there is a public equity program that's only going to be offered in limited areas because we already offer a public program through our partnership with LGP in Humboldt County. We won't be offering it through the REN, but it would be similar to those offerings. RA stands for resource acquisition, and that's what a lot of us think of when we think of energy efficiency programs. Those are the rebates, the direct installs, where we have incentives to get heat pumps or high efficiency appliances. There'll be a codes and standards. So the last presentation talked about REACH codes. This will be helping jurisdictions develop REACH codes, as well as having a hotline for contractors or building officials to call when they have questions about energy codes. Like, does this meet energy codes? We were just at a conference and hearing really interesting things about panel upgrades and how you can do electrification without having to do panel upgrades. And one of the biggest questions is, how do we get building officials to agree to this though? You know, on these creative solutions. So something like this. Workforce education and training probably speaks for itself, the need for that. A finance program, so a locally run finance program with microloans and bridge loans. And so a lot of these like larger loans for energy efficiency projects make you wait until either the project is done or a certain amount of time. So these would be bridge loans, so you can get to work on them right away. A residential equity program, and so that's addressing the things for residential customers that aren't widgets. And so assessments, education, outreach, things like that. And so this pretty much just sums up like the different programs that'll be offered in the different areas. There's the North Coast with RCEA. So we're going to be offering all the programs except for the public in Humboldt County. It will be offered in Lake and Mendocino County. And that again is because we already have an existing partnership with PG&E to offer those types of public services, which again, I think all of your jurisdictions have taken advantage of at one point or another. Budget. So 2023 is highlighted because we submitted for to begin in 2023. That year is pretty much locked off. So we're starting in 2024. So that total amount is not accurate. It's more like 84 million, excuse me, $84 million as the total budget. But just about 20,000, a little bit over for each year.
20 million.
20 million. What? I just haven't wrapped my head around those numbers, I guess, yet. Thank you. Yeah, about 20 million. And I'll show a breakdown of what's actually coming to our CEA next, but you can see it's distributed amongst the various programs. And it's going through 2027. And then there was a secondary budget, 2028 through 2031, that was tentatively approved, pending our performance on the first 4 years. So we're looking at an 8-year, approximately $170 million program. This is the RCEA side of the budget so the total budget again for 2024 was just under $20 million. The administrative, and so that's to act as the program administrator for the whole state. That's approximately 10% of the total budget. So that's 1,700,000 coming to RCEA to run the statewide program. There's another a little bit over $1 million going towards marketing and outreach. For direct implementation, there's that 14 million is passing through to the other partners, but there's these amounts. Let's see, so a little over 300,000 going towards incentives in the RCEA region and about 645,000 going towards labor for implementation. So that's going to help us run a lot more programs up in Humboldt County. And that's, I don't have our current budget, but I guess that's coming up next. So you can see how that compares to like the budgets that our programs have been operating under. And so I wanted to end with what some of the next steps are. So this has been something that's been taking up a lot of staff time, and a lot of staff have been doing a lot of heavy lifting on it. And I bolded the things that are going to be items coming before you in coming months to the board. And so we're awaiting the CPUC final decision, which could happen as soon as next week. I think it's mandated like 30 days after the proposed decision, but it could be delayed. But now we're going through all the comments and reply comments to the decision, but getting.
Publish the meeting agenda and it's on there for the 29th. So
It is on the 29th meeting agenda.
it could get pulled, but it's on there now.
Yeah, it could get, it's looking very positive. I guess we'll just say that there's been pretty overwhelming support throughout the state from all the investor-owned utilities, from the other 4 RENs that already exist to fund the rural REN. People really like the idea and have seen this as a need for a long time. So it's pretty likely, it's just timing. But we need to work on the partner MOU. That'll probably be coming before the board around in August. Job description for a rural REN portfolio manager. I wrote August, actually. It's probably coming before you in July next month. And also we're going to need to start getting some administrative support. And so one of the big things that we're going to have to do next is joint cooperation memos with every implementer that overlaps the territory that we'll be serving, and some administration, marketing, legal, and database solicitations that'll be coming throughout the next few months. Contracts with our rural REN partners and third-party implementer solicitations and contracts. So that's just giving a little heads up of some items that you might see coming before you. And with everything goes well, we'll be beginning implementing some of the programs as soon as January 2024. And so I just have one more pie chart that I think brings it all together for the last thing. The most accurate pie chart in the world. And any questions?
I'll just add, a couple comments on the proposed decision. So it's on the agenda for next week. Again, it could be modified. Sometimes there's like an alternative decision that gets put out by commissioner at the CPUC, could get pulled and delayed if there's, questions in the comment period. The decision did know that there was no opposition to our request. So that's, I think an encouraging sign that it hopefully won't be modified, but we'll have to wait until next week. And then the other part of the funding is, the budget is for starting programs in 2024, but there's a precedent from other RENs that when they started up of getting approval once the decision is final to start spending money. So, it's not additional budget, but it's like you can start spending your 2024 dollars in 2023 on ramp up activities in advance of actually like the program start dates. And so, as soon as the decision is final, we're going to be asking if we can start, incurring costs, which will help us not kind of, sort of sit on our hands as much as we can until January, but to actually start getting things moving sooner rather than later.
Which the timeline that I showed there with some of these items coming up was assuming that that would happen, if that doesn't happen, some of those timelines
Okay.
will be pushed, but it's definitely a possibility, but it's not guaranteed. We might be able to start expending money as soon as the decision is finalized. And then the other thing about the proposed decision, just to clarify also, this CPUC decision encompasses all the business plans submitted by, I should know the number, but I think around 14 program implementers throughout the state. And so many, all the IOU programs, which are magnitudes bigger than ours, plus a number of other CPUC policy decisions. And so some of the comments and discussion that were brought up by some of the stakeholder groups are about those other policy decisions that are included in the proposed decision. Nobody was commenting in any sort of negative fashion against approving the REN, but we have to, I think they approve everything all at once, not just the one little bit. So the delays would come not because anybody's objecting to the rural REN, but because of other things in that decision.
Questions from the board for staff? Anybody?
And this slide deck, along with all the slides, will, as usual, be uploaded to the website on the board agenda page. So, there's lots of content here that if your eyesight is bad like mine, you probably couldn't read anyway. But it'll be there for reference. So there's, if you want to refer back to those details, there's kind of narrative descriptions of stuff.
And I did include in the packet also a pretty comprehensive staff report. I realize that there's a lot of staff that weren't here for some of the former presentations on the REN and haven't been hearing about it for the past 5 or 6 years. So I wanted to make that available to everybody.
Thank you. We haven't gone out to the public yet on this, so now it's time, public.
Raise your hand if you want to speak. Otherwise, I do not see any hands raised.
All right. And there's nobody in here, so bring it back up to the board. Any other last questions? Yep, go ahead, Nellie.
Exciting. There's a lot of cool potential here. I appreciate the presentation and I just find it really exciting that we have this opportunity to, really coordinate with other rural communities and it's great stuff. So I guess we'll hear about the decision soon, but expect that this will be a great opportunity for us.
I agree. Our CEA taking a leadership position again. So thank you, staff. Thank you, Matthew.
As I've said before, I'm not sure if when they picked us, if we drew the long straw or the short straw, program administrator, but it kind of comes with its own budget. And so
Budget kind of exploded, that's for sure. All right, anybody else? Yep, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation and we'll keep our fingers crossed. I think this will be really great for rural communities. And I like that you highlighted the number of tribal communities that would be affected. There's 109 federally recognized tribes in California, the most federally recognized tribes across the nation. And 66 definitely presents 50% of California. And tribes are underserved populations, rural areas. So just wanted to say thank you for highlighting tribal organizations and areas.
Thank you. And I will say that one of the items in the decision, which is seeming to get really good traction, is that it's including all tribes under the definition of what's called hard to reach. And so that for various reasons, that enables more programs being able to go towards tribal communities. So I think that's another really good thing coming out of this, and that some of our rural partners and us have tried to highlight.
Great, thank you.
Well, thank you. Have to clicker back.
Okay. So let's see, that was 6.2. So moving on to new business, which is the budget, 7.1.
And so this will be, I'm going to go through it fairly briefly, just because it's almost identical presentation we had in May. There's very few changes, and I put things in purple, my daughter's favorite color. If there's something sort of different from last time, just to call out, you know, that a lot of this is kind of what was presented in May, although not everyone was here in May. So we'll kind of recap the same content. And so just to get on the, you know, the big energy sales, energy supply is, you know, by far our biggest kind of budget driver. And we're using the May 5th financial model numbers to kind of look forward. You know, those are updated actually on a daily basis by TEA, but we wanted to kind of keep it static, you know, so there's been some movement between now and then, but nothing that was like so dramatic that we needed to like completely rethink, you know, our strategy. So that's the same. The retail rate discount's the same, which, as we noted last time, you know, is a modest amount below PG&E rates, although collectively we have exceeded 6 million in cumulative ratepayer savings since we launched the program, and continue to provide slightly lower rates than PG&E. And so the thing that's changed, and this is really the only substantive thing that's changed in the budget, is that the procurement target revisions that the board adopted in May, as far as our percent renewable for 2023, that's added into the numbers now, along with some refreshed pricing assumptions around where the 2023 renewable carbon-free prices are actually hitting. Those changes to our hydropower / renewable procurement reduced the wholesale power costs in the budget by about 2.6 million compared to what was presented in May. And so that's really the only difference between the May presentation and this one. And then we're still assuming that Sandrini is online in April. That's a big question mark, but that hasn't been updated since there's hasn't been any new information that we've received since May. It doesn't actually change the budget, but as we just heard, the CPUC proposed decision actually kind of caught us off guard by coming out in May, sooner than we thought it was going to come out. And then as noted, that the final decision is scheduled to be voted on next week. And it includes basically what we asked for, as Stephen said, you know, close to $20 million for 2024. The total, as was said, is about 84 million for the first 4 years. And there's a provisional authorization for the next 4 years of an additional 93 million. So that wasn't something we actually had asked for, but the way that the decision is set up, they're approving this 4 years, and then they're basically directing what the utility sort of rate collection amounts will be for the next 4 years after that. And so they said, well, you know, we're going to put in continuing the REN budget, although obviously, you know, we'll see if they actually are using it. And so, but it provisionally includes basically an 8-year funding for RCEA, and then to administer of over $177 million. And then for this fiscal year budget, actually didn't change the budget any, because we had kind of, you know, crossed our fingers and hoped and included what, you know, we had requested for in our original proposal. And so there's about 7.5 million of the budget for the REN program is passed through to those partner agencies, so that, you know, the big chunk of you know, funding is playing to all those statewide partners. So there's no change to the budget numbers of the decision, because it was consistent with what we had requested. So it's news, but not any budget revisions. And then just some other notes. It includes the personnel and compensation changes, the sort of package of things that the board adopted in May. Those were already included in the draft, so there's no change to the budget from what was approved by the board last month. I just noted that if you actually went and compared line item to line item, there was a few spots where we shifted, I think pretty much all in the DSM, demand side management kind of budget, like program areas. There's some shifting of like where the staff budgets are allocated, but nothing, no change in the total number or the bottom line number. Just, you know, if you actually look at the column, there's a little bit of movement between where the staff time was allocated. And then it still includes 500,000 for the office relocation effort, and 200,000 for grid assessment and analysis. And, you know, we just heard of another example and unfortunately of some of the issues we're seeing with the local regional grid and causing constraints on renewable generation. There's we heard from the county earlier today that there's a housing like development, I think about 60 homes in McKinleyville that's like graded, ready to build since like 2021 or something, and they can't proceed because they can't get the electric interconnections, and it's right in the middle of McKinleyville, and it shouldn't really be an issue. So we want to have some resources to hopefully address that. And this last bullet is something that's not new to this year, but it's just an ongoing factor. A lot of our power procurement, basically all of our power procurement kind of activities are typically sort of on a calendar year basis, and the PG&E rate settings on a calendar year basis. So the 2023 numbers for the first 6 months of the fiscal year are pretty solid. There's a lot of assumptions and kind of much more possibility for movement in the second half of the fiscal year in 2024. We don't have good visibility of what PG&E rates are going to be in 2024. Power market prices can move a lot between now and then. We don't know when Sandrini is actually going to be online. If it, depending on how long it's delayed, there's a possibility of delay damages payment that we could receive, which could be significant, and that's not included in the budget. So, the 2024 numbers are less firm, but I think we felt like what's in there now is still sort of a middle of the road, not the best case scenario, not the worst case scenario of outcomes. And so hopefully it'll be close or better than the budget as far as how things actually play out. And just going down, so these have not changed since the May presentation. Electricity sales is the big item. Grants and contracts is going up significantly. And so that's the rural REN element is where that big bump is coming from. And then, program related service fees like our EV charging network is fairly consistent and obviously a pretty small number comparatively. To make it visual, there's electricity sales is really where, our revenue comes from, although the gray wedge is bigger than it's ever been due to the REN program ramp up. And then on the expenses side, and I won't go through the details over there, the sort of notes section, but this is the one number that's changed as far as the totals is the wholesale power supply costs are 0.6 million less than what was presented in May due to the board's action in May. And then, the personnel budget, again, is consistent with what was approved last month. Excuse me. The facilities operation is going up a little bit. We've got a number of EV charging station projects in the work, as well as the 500,000 for the new office effort is in that line item. So that's the main increase there. Communication outreach, that, the big jump there is there's a set aside specific like marketing and outreach budget for the REN that we're administering directly for all of the statewide partners. So that's part of our admin. So that's why that number is so much larger than before. And then the program and professional services, again, $7.5 million of pass-through funding to other REN partner regions is where that big bump comes from. And then the other numbers are fairly consistent. I think I mentioned the program expenses drop is really a shift in how we're categorizing utility taxes that we collect and then pass through to the jurisdictions. And so before that was in this line item, and now we're moving it so it doesn't kind of show up on our books as like an expense item, since it's just really we collect it from customers and pass it through to the jurisdiction. So it changed the budget number, but the underlying activity just bumped it up into the wholesale tail side of our line items. And so, the same kind of visual, the big thing is wholesale power supply. That's where we spend most of our money. The, personnel is fairly small, but one of our larger items. And then the professional program services, which includes all of our CCA administrative activities like TEA and Calpine that does our billing. Those are the kind of usually the biggest items that make that a fairly significant budget item. But then with the REN pass-through dollars are bucketed under program services. And so that's why that has gotten larger than it's been in the past. And then on the revenue side, as noted overall is the bottom line. Revenue is same as presented last meeting, a little bit short of 110 million. Expenses are down 2.6 million from what was presented in May, and then that at the bottom line increased the net revenue forecast for the year up to 12.2. Compared to what was presented, which was 9 point, whatever it was, 6 or 7 last meeting. So pretty much the same budget with that one change for procurement. And so the recommendation, unless there's any questions or additional comments, would be to hopefully approve coming year's fiscal budget.
Thank you, Matthew. Questions? Yeah, Natalie.
I noticed in our agenda packet, on the third page of the budget, kind of spreadsheet conversion that was saying that there's strategic planning at the top, but I didn't know what that correlated to. Is that happening? Is that under?
Yeah, so that's the big item there, the 200,000 that's down under professional program services. That's the grid analysis. So what exactly that's going to be, so that's where we put that assessment of the grid.
Okay.
And then the other work that usually falls under this is support on the climate action plan, for example. So, our work with the county and cities on that. And then also kind of planning and big picture work on our own internal strategic plans. So the Repower Humboldt strategic plan, when we're like talking about like, hey, let's look at how we can develop, a more like comprehensive approach to energy resilience at public facilities. And so, okay, that would be strategic planning. So it's kind of, activities that are not sort of direct implementation type work. That answer your question?
It does. I was thinking we were doing like board specific strategic planning, and that makes sense that there's a bunch of different like avenues that we're doing planning in. So that takes care of it.
Anybody else? Come up here. All right, I'll take it out to the public now. This is item 7.1, our budget.
I see no raised hands. I'm talking slow, but nobody has jumped in. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Nancy. I'll bring it back up to the board. And if there's no more questions, then I'd entertain a motion.
I will move to adopt the proposed RCEA fiscal year 2023-24 budget. I can say the word budget.
Thank you. So go ahead. All right. All in favor? Say aye. Aye. Any nays? Any opposed? Anybody abstaining? Nope. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, staff. And staff reports, item 8.1.
I just wanted to highlight one item that's sort of come up that we may be bringing back some possible projects or things to consider. As some of the state and federal funding is kind of ramping up and actually starting to roll out, we're keeping an eye on grant opportunities and things to pursue. And one of the things that has come up is there's the USDA has a like rural electric utility low interest loan program for projects. And that's the loan program we used for financing the airport microgrid. They have just sort of announced and are rolling out a new sort of enhancement to that loan program that there's lots of pieces to it, but the thing of most relevance is if you're doing a renewable energy project with that loan program, we would be eligible for potentially 40% loan forgiveness. So basically, you do the project, and if it's a solar project or a solar and storage project, you could get 40% loan forgiveness, which is kind of like a grant. It's actually, if the project is owned by or is predominantly serving a tribe, it's 60% loan forgiveness. And so if you combine that rural electric utility loan forgiveness with the 30% like direct pay provision. So, traditionally you had to be a taxable entity to get the 30% tax credit for a renewable energy project. Well, now if you're a non-taxed entity, you can get a 30% like direct payment. And so 40% plus 30% is 70% of a project's cost, or 60% plus 30% is 90% of a project's cost. So I think they have $1 billion of funding for this round. And so the first step is just to submit concept papers, basically, or kind of, to get sort of in the queue, and there's really no risk or much effort associated with that. So we're probably going to just submit every single thing we can think of and see, all right, let's get in the queue. And then, kind of evaluate, where it might make sense, just, because if those two things kind of, and we just kind of had the first pass of reading through it and are kind of digging into the specific rules. But, if we're able to get 30%, like a tax rebate equivalent, plus the loan forgiveness, that could, be a pretty big buy down for local renewable projects.
Yay. Questions for Matthew on this? Comments, questions?
So cool.
Very cool. Yeah. That's money.
Okay, how about anybody out in the public? We're at item 8.1.
I see no hands raised.
All right, so no action on that. Anything about future agenda items from the board or from staff?
I mean, if there's something that comes out of that, yeah, I'd love to hear.
Yeah, we would obviously have to bring back if we're actually going to move forward with some project or projects that would come back to the board.
Great. Anything else? Take it out to public. Item 9, future agenda items.
Thank you for asking. I see no indication of new agenda items.
Okay, well then at this point, we are going to enter into a closed session. This is item 10.1, conflicts with real property negotiations pursuant to Government Code Section 549-56.8 regarding APN number 001-131-007. Our CEA negotiator is executive director. Owner's negotiating party is Greg Casagrande, and under negotiation is price and terms. So at this point, I'll let you organize, Lori, who needs to, what electronic things need to happen.
So I'm going to pause.
You know? Okay, we are coming out of closed session, reconvening to open session. And item 12, the closed session report, we have nothing to report out. All right, ready? Okay, so item 13 is adjourned. So I do that. Again, she's out the door. All right.
Thanks. Oh,
Out the door. Oh, I think she had somewhere to go though. She looked in a hurry.
No, I was like, I kept catching her eyes like, oh, yeah, she had to go at 5:30. Hey.
the good old days.
Where are you at? That's it. That's all.